I only have one big announcement. Somebody asked this in a channel. Um, when is when is Unit 3 over, or when is Unit 2 over, and what's the next cutoff deadline and stuff like that. So first of all, check your class calendar for all unit cutoff deadlines. We have a few months before there are any drop dates, so it'll be November 13th is the next date to watch out for. And there are only 4 assignments in Unit 2, so by that point, you need to have all 4 of those assignments demoed and marked off. And then will be Unit 3 or liftoff 1 week following that. So 11/13, 1 week break. So 11/20, we start back up. And then liftoff, or Unit 3 will start, and we will have a week break for the winter break, and that will go until January 22nd, and that's when class will be over. And the graduation date we have marked down right now is, I believe, January 24th. That is subject to change. And yeah, then class is completely done. Everything is taken care of. So that covers that for dates. I'll update the liftoff or the class calendar as soon as I have those exact dates ironed out with the people that are running liftoff. And yeah, we have our first catch-up day of Unit 2 coming up on Thursday. So hope people are liking Java so far. You can use that time to work on assignments, and we're also planning on having a company team come in and talk about the apprenticeship program a little bit at 5:30, and answer any questions regarding that. And that's all I have for announcements for the day. And I'll see y'all later. Yeah. Oh, and TAs, I'm going to open up a room in about 2 minutes. Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks. All right. So tonight we are talking about classes, part 1 of classes. We're just going to unpack the basics, and we will, you'll do a studio that's kind of part 1 of the same studio, and you'll finish it off next class. But yeah, so as Colin said, tonight there is a, sorry, let me start that over. Thursday is a catch-up class, and you will have that guest speaker from the Launch Code Company team. There's no class on Monday. And then, of course, the graded assignment deadline is on that Thursday, the 7th. That's going to cover everything we're talking about through tonight, just classes part 1, chapters 1 through 4. I will have an intro video for that graded assignment soon. As soon as I possibly can, which may not be until like Thursday, but I'll do what I can. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into classes part 1. So we're going to talk about the basics of classes that are used for object-oriented programming, where you're actually going to be, creating instances of these classes. We'll talk about what access modifiers are, what encapsulation is. We'll talk about how to define a constructor. And we'll get started a little bit talking about methods. We're going to talk about them a lot more in detail in the next class. And then I'm just going to talk for a minute about designing classes, just the approach to how to think about structuring classes, because that's what you're going to do for your studio tonight. Okay, so Java class basics. The concept of object-oriented programming is that, you actually create objects from a class. And up until now, Java's completely class-based, right? We established this the first night of this unit. So you've just been writing classes that had a main function just to be able to execute your program, and you might have had some classes that just had some methods in them, but you weren't creating objects. You weren't creating instances of those classes. So now we're going to focus on that. How do you write a class that's intended to provide the structure and the pattern for an object? So this is what object-oriented programming is all about, that you create multiple objects all based on the same class. So I have this example here. Let's say you have a class that's called book and you want to create, and maybe it has a title and it has an author. So you might have several objects that are all based on that template that are, they have their unique title, unique author, but all of them are objects of that class. Now, this is exactly how you use classes in JavaScript. So none of this should be so far unfamiliar conceptually. Where things are going to start to differ is where we talk about some of the syntax. Okay, so let's talk about vocabulary and syntax with Java. Every piece of data that's stored for an object is known as a field or an instance variable. If we use the term property, it's more specific than that. It actually would be something that you can set values for after the fact. But everything that is just a piece of data that's stored in the class would be called a field. If you take actions, you define any sort of behavior for the class, those are methods. And this is the same terminology you're accustomed to. Instead of calling them functions, we call them methods because they are attached to classes. And as far as constructors go in Java, unless you need to actually pass values to the constructor when you are creating an object of that class, you actually can leave it out because Java classes have a default definition for the constructor. And all the classes you've been using so far, that's what's been happening behind the scenes. It's got a default constructor. So we're going to look at, examples of both of those tonight. What happens if you want to create a class that you're going to have fields and methods and things, but you don't necessarily have to give it any data when you're creating an object of that class? And then we'll look at an example of where you do. And we'll talk about how to write those constructors. So I've got, example here where this is, give me just a second. Yeah, I've got an example here where I've got this class library, and maybe this library stores an array list of books that are, book objects. And we have, a little method called add book that would allow us to just add a book, one book at a time to that array list. So books here is a field, and add book would be a method. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, here's something else. You might remember from JavaScript that with objects and classes, there was the this keyword, right? That also exists in Java, but it's actually optional most of the time. So here's how that works. The only time that you really absolutely have to have it is if you would have a conflict with some sort of local variable of the same name, like in a method. So you can avoid that by using a different name altogether. But here's what it looks like when you do need to use it. So I've got this field title, right, that I've established. And then I've got this method down here, set title, that is going to set the value of that field. And so I need to refer to it as this dot title because I also have a local variable here that's being passed in that's called title. And so I'll say this dot title should be set to the value of title that's being passed into here. So this is, it's not uncommon to see the same exact name used, which, in some cases, what some people would argue is clarity. You also might see people do something different, like they might say a title instead of title, and that way. And then if you do that, you don't have to use this keyword. But in this case, this keyword will differentiate between those two to make sure that Java knows which one is referring to the field and which one is referring to that local variable inside that method. So otherwise, when you're referring to things inside the class, it's always going to default to assuming you're talking about the field. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about constructors in a little bit. So let me talk about access modifiers, and then we're going to take a look at what it's like to create some of these fields in some code. So access modifiers, there's three basic concepts here. There's default, there's public, there's private. The public keyword will allow a field or a method to be available anywhere. And I mean anywhere, like in the universe, if it has access to your application. But private makes sure that it's only available inside that class. That's the most restrictive. But there's this in between. If you don't use any sort of modifier at all, or if you use the protected keyword, that means it's default access, which is that anywhere inside the package, that variable or method will be accessible, but not outside the package. So that can be useful when you have things that are, it's called package private, essentially. When you have something that you want to be accessible to some of the other classes that are in that package, but not outside that. So there's going to be some different things you'll kind of learn that you generally are going to default probably to using private with your fields. You're generally going to default to using public with things like a constructor and certain types of methods. And then you'll have other ones that you might just leave default, like in this third example here, where I've said what the return type is, but I haven't actually given it public or private or anything like that. So that is just package private. It's protected. All right. The most restrictive modifier is generally what you should go for in any situation. You want to keep it as secure as possible. And if you have a legitimate need for it to be, to the next least restrictive, then you can do that. But that's the kind of the rule that most people go by. So again, private means inside the class only. Public means there's absolutely no restrictions whatsoever. And then if you call it, you can call it from anywhere within the package if you have, a method like this that doesn't have private or public on it. Okay, let's go over and actually work on, sorry, give me just a second here. Let's go over and actually work on just declaring some of these fields, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the concept of encapsulation. So if I want to create that array list that we talked about for the library and give it private access to protect it, make it to where, we can only access it here, then I'm going to say private array list and import that. And then I'm going to say of book type. Now, book exists over here, but we haven't actually given it anything yet, but the file exists, so it's going to let me do this. And you don't have to, remember, you don't have to explicitly import another class in the same package. It already knows about it. And then I'll call it books. I'll give it a name and say it's just going to be a new array list that will just be empty for now. So that's one way to just declare a field, just like that. Now over in book, we could, create several fields here. We could create, title, author, num pages available. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger for you guys. Okay, so let's start at the top here and just do the title one. So I'll say private string title, and I'm only declaring these. I'm not initializing them yet, because this particular class is going to have a constructor, and that's how we're going to get those values and initialize them. So I'll have an int called num pages and one last Boolean here called available. Is the book available or not in our library? And I have to spell it correctly. There we go. And this one, I am going to go ahead and initialize it to true, because, if a book gets entered into the system for the first time, we haven't loaned it out yet. So it's definitely available to begin with. So that's all there is to it. And I am making all of these private. Let's talk about why I would do that. So encapsulation, this is an important concept that is a core tenet of object-oriented programming. You want to make sure that all of your relevant code is together, that it's collected together within a class and within a package. Just, put things together that make sense. That's part of encapsulation. But another part of it is the access modifiers. You want to allow changes only in the places that are truly necessary, and then protect that data otherwise. So, sorry. Fields should almost always be private. Special methods called getters and setters, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Those are used instead to access them outside the class. So you can make all of your fields private because you're going to have another mechanism within the class to change the values or to access those values. And then those are what become available outside the class if you wish. So in this example, again, private means inside the class only. So right now, title can't be changed from outside. It can't be read from outside. It's completely, closed off from everywhere except for inside this class. The get title, and this is actually a getter, it's just a function that means, I want to go get that value and have access to it. So we'll make this public, no problem. We have no problem in this case with someone outside, some other code outside the class or someone out of the class going and getting the value. Great. But the setter, we might need that to be available to other classes in the package, but we don't want it to be available publicly. So we're just going to leave that off and give it the default where it's package private. It can be used anywhere within the package, just not outside that. Here's an example, by the way, where I used an alternate name so that I didn't use this keyword. You can see I gave it a title so that you could see the difference between the field that I'm setting the value from it's being passed into this method. Okay, so again, these are called getters and setters. This is a kind of tried and true way that you can bear out this concept of encapsulation, protect your actual fields, and then write these getters and setters to control how they're changed. So if you want to write getters and setters, you can see that the naming convention is pretty straightforward, right? Get field and set field, that's pretty normal. But for Booleans, you want to use is field because it's going to return true or false. Okay, so why would you use getters and setters? So you can actually, another nice thing about establishing these as methods is that you can add other code to it, not just getting or setting. You can do something else if you need to, other behavior. You also can add validation. Maybe you don't want to set something until you've made sure that this is true or that's true, like an empty string or something like that. And then again, you can specify that access for getting differently from setting. You might be perfectly fine with the getting being public, but you don't want just anybody to be setting. And so having these two separate methods, getters and setters, allows you to separate that level of access from the original field itself. And sorry. Oh, I apparently have it doubled up on my, okay, there we go. So getters, again, get title is the getter here and set title is the setter. So one last thing to know before we go over and code some of these is that IntelliJ actually has a generate feature. This is super awesome and you're going to like it a lot. And it allows you to go in and just add all the getters and setters as long as the fields have already been declared, then IntelliJ knows about it. And you can just pull this up and say, hey, let me, specify that these are the ones I want. Go ahead and generate these for me. And boom, it does it like that. So let's go actually look at how this is done. All right. So if we go, for example, let's go back to our library first. We're using a default constructor for this one because we don't need to pass anything in. So the next thing that you would have after you would have your constructor would be the setters. And actually, I'm going to change my mind about this. I don't want to generate setters in this one because I want to write very specific methods. Let's go back to book. Okay, so in book, we can see we've established these 4 fields. We're going to define some constructors, but we don't need to do that yet. We can go ahead and just define the getters and setters. So we're going to use this IntelliJ, generate feature to do this. We're going to create getters and setters for title, author, and num pages. We only need a getter for available because we're going to have an instance method later that's going to actually handle setting it separately. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. So you can right click. One way to get to this is to right click right here and just say generate. right there. That opens up a little dialog that lets you pick what you want. In this case, I'm going to say getter and setter. And I'm going to use the shift key to select all three of these and then say OK. And now we have getters and setters. Look at that, 6 methods with the click of a mouse. Get title, set title, get author, set author, get num pages, set num pages. They have the correct parameters. They have the correct return types. And they have you'll notice that they've made them all public. So if you wanted to actually, protect these, you could go and change that to where it's going to not default to public. But it gives you a place to start, right? If you needed to add validation, you can add validation to one of these. But this is good for now. And so then for Boolean, our last Boolean available, we said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm doing the wrong thing. The other way to do this on a Mac anyway is Command N. I cannot for the life of me remember what it is on a PC, but you guys can look that up. And that gets you to this menu very quickly. And this time I'm going to say, I really only want a getter for available. So we'll just add the getter for that. And now I have all these methods that are going to allow me to make changes to or read these private fields. Okay, who has questions? I see Wesley's hand has been up. Wesley?
I had a question about one of your earlier slides,
Okay.
where you used a title and you omitted this dot title.
Yes.
So that's public, like it's private, it's within the package.
Right.
So if there was another title, would that also set that variable, like because it's public and it doesn't have this?
No, because you're going to be calling it, any method is going to be called on an object of the class.
Okay.
So you're attaching this, so like, let's say we had, a book called, I'm blanking on names of books, like suddenly. Okay, let's say it's Think Again. It's a book I've got on my shelf. We would, let's say we had an object called Think Again. We'd say Think Again dot set title, right? So we're doing it very specifically on an object of this class. So it's definitely going to use the right one.
So is it ever really necessary to use this then if we're always...
You don't have to. If you do it this way where you name the parameter something different than title, then you can do this. If you named this title, then you would need to use this to differentiate between the two, because otherwise it's always going to default to assuming you're talking about the field.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Connor?
Okay, so I understand the concept of the getters and setters, but when you use that right-click generate method, and it gives you like a start, gives you the template for the getters and setters, I noticed they automatically revert to public access modifiers. But if it were to do that, I mean, I assume it's not like smart in a sense. How do you know? Like, is it just experience and practice with it? Like when to use private or package private for certain setter getter methods? Or
yeah, it's going to depend on the type of data and what your intention is for it. By and large, you're going to want your setters to not be public. You're going to generally make them at minimum package private, but possibly even private, depending on what you're doing. It depends on how you need to use them and from where. But yeah, you'll get a sense of it. And when we start getting into working with databases and all of that, a lot of things are going to start to really define themselves a little better, because they won't be just super simple examples. They'll be like really much more real life application, Yeah,
because right now it just seems kind of vague as to when to. Yeah. Okay. Just make.
We'll get there, and we're going to talk more about this in conjunction with like the difference between instance methods and static methods also in the next class. So we'll get into it a little bit too.
Cool.
Yep. Okay, Gabe?
Yeah, I guess my question was pretty similar to that. I was trying to understand when you would use this package private versus just private or public. Yeah.
So let's say I'm over in my main. We haven't done anything with this yet, but we will. Let's say I'm over here in main and I create my library object in my books and I add the books to the library with the methods and all that kind of thing. If I'm going to do some of those things here and call some of those methods, then that's where it's going to be really important that they're actually at minimum default, if not public, because I need to be able to access them from main, not just within that class.
Okay.
Yeah, so it just depends on where you need to use them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Zach?
So if you scroll up a little bit on this code, you did set these title, author, num pages to private, and you said you're going to access these through the methods, right? That you created. Can you give me an example, like on why would you access these through the methods, and why do you want to keep these private?
Because it's too easy to just go and say author equals whatever and set a value on it anywhere you want otherwise. You know, when you set up a full stack project and you actually have information, like I said earlier that anything that's public can be accessed from anywhere in the universe if they have a way into your code, right? Well, that's true. So it's just a way of protecting them to make sure that they're encapsulated, that they're, you know, this is part of this code. And I want to make sure that I very carefully control who has access to it and from where. So if you default to making these private and have getters and setters, you're maintaining that control. And there again, you can make one public and one, you know, private or package private, you know, default. And then the getting and the setting are now two different things with two different levels of security.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Devin?
Yeah, apologies if I'm regurgitating some things that you've talked about. So if I understand, public is anywhere in the world, protected or package private is just that package, and then private is just that class. So if I understand that, wouldn't most things, unless explicitly, you know, told to be just protected, to just be accessed by like that package? So if something else wants to use that, then they would have to import the package to use that class, or use that method, and to only make things like running the main app public?
Honestly, you know, again, I think, you know, I had mentioned that the general advice is to keep things as protected as possible. So you generally are going to want to be very conservative about it and only make it public if there's a reason out there that it has to be available.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Great questions, guys. This whole public and, you know, private and access thing can be harder to wrap your head around when you haven't seen a more complex project with you know, multiple files, multiple packages. As we go through this unit and you're starting seeing more examples of more extensive and complex applications, some of this will start to really, you know, sink in. Okay, so I need to get back to where I was before. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about constructors, and we'll code some constructors, and then we'll take some more questions and then take a break. All right, so constructors, behavior and syntax. So a constructor does not have a special keyword in Java like it does in JavaScript. You just name it as a method, the same as the class. You give it generally public because you need to be able to create an object from somewhere else. It shouldn't have any return type. That's one distinction between the syntax for a constructor and like any other method. Parameters should be individually typed when you pass them in, just like for any other method. And when you are initializing fields, again, use this if your parameter has the exact same name as your field. Just make sure you use this to clarify, I'm talking about the field, and this is talking about the local variable. Okay, so again, there's the class name. If the class is named book, then the name that you assign this method needs to be the exact same thing, book, capital B. There's that typed parameter, and there's that field. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Again, it's just like any other method, except that you name it this the same as the class, and you don't give it a return type. And then inside that, you can do anything you want to do, including, setting values for some of the fields that you need to. Give me a second. All right. Yeah. And that's where we're differentiating there. Okay. So that's all there is to a constructor. I know you guys understand how constructors work because of JavaScript. The concept is the same. But there are some things that are quite different. One of these is the concept of overloading. You can actually have optional parameters, but rather than assigning them within a single constructor like you would have done with JavaScript, in order to do that, you actually have additional constructors with slightly different signatures. So you just call the primary constructor to set the default values of anything that you want to not require. So I can actually, in this example, have two different constructors here. I can have book that has title, author, and num pages, and it sets all three. And then I could say, well, what if we're not setting the number of pages? What if we only have the title and author at the moment, but we need to create it, right? Let's allow that by creating a second constructor that looks just like the first, except it doesn't have that third parameter. We're only going to require title and author. And when we pass in those values, we're going to just call this. So the keyword this here becomes actually really important, because this is how you actually call something. You call the constructor from inside the same class. You just say this, and then you give it title and author that's passed into the second constructor, but then you give it a default value of 0 here, just to fulfill this requirement, because the original constructor does require that number. So this is called overloading. Again, when we get into working with more complex applications, especially when we start working with databases and stuff, you're going to see other examples of this. Wesley, I can go ahead and answer your question now.
Sure. So just so I have it straight, like you have to, in your first constructor, spell it all out. You can't do what you did in the second part, but
Right.
anytime after that, you can do that second
Exactly.
way of doing
Yeah,
it.
you
Okay.
have to. Yeah, you have to have an original constructor that has more going on, and the idea here is you're actually simplifying it a little bit, but you're just using the original constructor to take care of the remainder of whatever it is you're leaving out here.
Thank you.
Yeah, Connor.
Real quick, the 0, that's like a default value for num pages.
Mhm.
What if it was, what if we were trying to use a default value for like a string? What would the default value be?
Anything you want. It could be null. It could be.
It can't be.
It could be some other string. It could be, yeah. Yeah, it can just be whatever you need as the placeholder for what you want it to be, in case that value isn't available when you're instantiating the object.
Okay, it can be anything like a parameter would be.
Right. But basically what I'm saying, how have decided to define this is, we always have to have a title and an author. The only thing that we can live without is the num pages. And if that's the case, then we can just call it with the first two, and it will automatically provide a number of 0 for that, because we've defined it that way here with the overloaded constructor.
I got it. Cool.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so let's practice doing this. And we're going to come up here and define 2 constructors for our book class. The first one is going to look, this is going to look just like what I had on the slide, actually, guys. But let's actually do this, because okay. Yes, this is why I was waiting. Guess what? The generate feature in IntelliJ also allows you to produce constructors very easily. So you just, as long as those fields have already been created, you can just go in and say, I want to generate a constructor, and then you choose which ones you want, and boom. So let's watch that happen, because it's pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to say I want a constructor, and I'm going to choose just the first 3 because available has already been set. And there you go. I've got myself a nice constructor here, where it automatically, assigned, all of the parameters and assigned those values to the fields that are defined, declared up here. And that's it. So now we need to do the second one. And this is where You know, I'm gonna just say, I want public, I want book. I do want string title and string author, but that's it. And so I'm just gonna call the previous constructor with this, pass in title, pass in author, and then for num pages, I'll just give it 0. That's what I want my, you know, default value to be. And maybe there's some reason why mathematically you wouldn't want to use 0. You'd want to use null instead. It just depends on what you're, you know, what you decide you're going to do with it. But that's the basics. And like I said, for library, we're not going to have a constructor. We're not going to pass any data in. We're just going to let it create the object and then work with the array list, this field that we've created after the fact. And we're going to do that with some custom methods. We'll get to that in a little bit. So are there any other questions about constructors before we take our break?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So say that in that example, we wanted to make like both options optional. Would like say that I wanted to require title and I could pass in num pages, but author could be optional. Would you do like a separate secondary constructor with that like permutation? Or how would that work?
Yeah, you could actually do that because of the way that you're calling this and passing it in. As long as you put things where they need to go, you could do that. Because you could just say, I want to require this. The kicker is things can get a little squirrely sometimes when things start getting out of order. So ideally, you're going to save whatever the one that you want to have a default value and make optional. You want to save that one for last. So if I was going to do that, I would probably order them differently. I probably would have ordered them title, num pages, and then author.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, just save it for last. But Java lets you get away with having, you know, multiple. I mean, you can actually have it can be done. But for clarity's sake, usually you put the ones that are optional last. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, if there are not any more questions about this, we are going to take a break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about methods and designing classes. And we'll do a little more coding here on these methods and then get you guys off to studio. So we'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's talk about methods. So up until now, the methods you've been writing have been static methods, which means that they are associated with the class as a whole, and not necessarily associated with the individual objects. But you typically are going to put these methods at the bottom of the class after the getters and setters. And these can be called on any object that is an instance of the class. That's an instance method. So this means you might, have where you're using some of the instance fields, like title and author. And so it's going to be different for every single one. That means that these methods are actually stored with the object and not just stored at the class level. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the difference between those two next time. So for now, just keep in mind, the methods I'm writing are instance methods. They are not static. They are actually going to be attached to the objects. So I think, let's see. I think I'm going to go ahead and talk about designing classes before we go over and start creating, coding some things. There's this thing called a single responsibility principle, and it basically just says every class should define the behavior for its own data. So, keep like things with like things. If it's unrelated to that, then it probably belongs somewhere else. And you don't want anything to get too big and unwieldy, right? So keep things, encapsulated and small and like things with like things. So when you're designing a class, you want to ask yourself what fields are needed, what data types, what information do you need to store about that object that this class represents. Do you need a constructor to set some of those values at the point of instantiation, like we defined before with book? What getters and setters do you need? You can make those decisions. Maybe you need both. Maybe you need just one or the other. Maybe you don't need either one, depending on what field it is and what its purpose is, and how it's going to be used. And then what instance methods do you need? So that you can define that behavior that's going to allow you to change values or print out something or whatever it is. So I've got this example here. There's one more bullet point, sorry. What level of access should each field and method have? So again, just thinking through how is something going to be used? Where does it need to be accessible from? Let's keep it as restrictive as possible, but it will open it up where we need to. So I've got, these two classes that I've already established, book and library. I've given book 4 fields, title, author, num pages, and available. And library, I just have this array list of books. So in order to, maybe provide the title and author in a nice, easily printed format, I'll just create a little method that will, concatenate those together and send that back, because that's going to be useful in a variety of places. And then I also need to check a book out and check it back in. And that's where we actually control that available Boolean's value being changed. So we're going to set that to true or false. Meanwhile, over in the library, we're not concerned with the behavior related to an individual book, like we are over, in book. So here, what we're interested in is how do we update the list of books? So we need an add book, which is akin to a setter. It's just that, we're not overwriting the entire thing. We're actually just adding a book to it as it exists. And then print available books. Let's have a nicely formatted way to print out in the console, every single book, but only if it's available. Maybe that's something that's important, some sort of use case for what we're doing. So that's another good, method to have associated at the library level, because we're looking at all of the books. We're working with this list of books. So I differentiated between those different needs, those different requirements, and kind of defined some things that I'd like to write. Now, be careful about scope. And when I say scope, I'm not talking about variable scope. I'm talking about the scope of your project. It is very, very easy to start going, nuts thinking, oh, I could have this method and I could have that method and we could do all these cool things. But rein it in, because you really only want to stick to what you absolutely need for the requirements. Maybe down the road, you're going to add some additional functionality to some classes and, add some complexity to your application. And that's where you might actually need some of those things that could be super cool. I'm one of these people that tends to try to I think of everything, I'm thinking through all these details and going, oh, hey, I could do this and I could do that. And I have to stop myself and rein myself back in and say, nope, I only need these for now. So if you are like me, I wanted to put out that word of warning, because it's easy to start to let it just get away from you. So this is what I'm going to stick with for now. I'm only interested in being able to print the books. In order to do that, I want to be able to easily print the title and the author together. So I might as well produce that here. And then I want to be able to check books in and out, and then be able to print the available books here, based on the current value of that available Boolean for each one that's in the list. So let's go over and code this. All right. Okay, so there's sorry, I got to get back to my files, guys. I think I mentioned last class that I am getting another monitor, and I'm so excited, but I don't have it yet. So it's going to be easier. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead down here below the getters and setters. We have, our fields. We've got our constructors, both of them. We've got our getters and setters. So below that is where you want to start putting additional methods. So the first one is this get title and author. I just want it to say something like book title by author name. And I want to give it default access so that it is available anywhere inside the package. So with that in mind, I'm just going to leave off an access modifier and just say string get title and author. And I don't need to have any sort of parameters because I'm only working with the data that's from this particular class. So I can just return title plus, and then I'll put the word by with some spaces in there, and then concatenate on the author. It's a very simple thing, but it's going to be super useful anytime we just want to grab that together and not have to type this in lots of different places. Okay, so we can do that, and then we can also define these methods checkout and check-in. Now checkout and check-in, I want to have public access because this may need to be used from other places. So I'm going to start by making it public, and I'm going to have the return type be void, because all I'm doing with this is changing the values of fields. I'm not actually returning anything. And the first thing it needs to do is to change the availability. So I'm just to say make available false. Now, if I had chosen, and I very well could have, if I had chosen to have a setter for this for available, which I didn't, then I could use that. But if I did that, I probably would have wanted to make it protected as well. But in this case, I'm just going to set it directly, and that's totally okay because I'm inside the class. I can do that from here, even if that's private, because it's accessible anywhere in here. So I'm just going to set it directly. And then I'm going to print something that just says, I'm going to put a little new line character there, and I'm going to say get title and author. And then has been checked out of the library. So when I do this, I should be able to see it happen, get a little readout in the console that acknowledges that it's been taken care of. And then we can do something very similar down here. So I'm going to just copy this and paste this here and say, this is going to be check in. We're going to set available back to true. And then we're going to say, has been checked in here. And that should be sufficient. Okay. So let's go ahead and, we haven't tested any of this yet, right? We have, I guess, one more thing that we need to do. We need to let's go ahead and do these methods, and then we're going to go over to main, and we're going to test all of this out. We're going to create objects from these classes, and then we're going to start using these methods. But we'll go ahead and just define them first. Ordinarily, when you are developing, you probably should be testing it like as you're going, but it's okay. So here I'm just going to add a book. It's going to be pretty straightforward because we can just use the array list method add. So I'm going to say this public, it's void. It doesn't return anything. It just does something. And I'm going to call it add book. And I'm going to say pass in a book. We need a specific book because this is the library class, right? Where you have a whole list of books. So in order to do this, you have to specify what book is it that you want to add. And here we'll just say books.add, which is just a method of the array list class, and say book. Pass in that book object and add it to that array list up here, which we defined is an array list of book objects. Okay, so that's that. That one's pretty easy. This one is going to be several lines of code. I'm going to make it public, void, print available books, because all we're doing is just printing some information. It's not important that this be, super protected. So I'm going to start by printing a line that just says, list of books available. Oops. Okay. And then after that, I'm going to loop through my array list, and then if something is actually available, we'll print an additional line for each one. So remember, we have this for each loop that we can use. So I'm going to say for each book, and I have to type it. So I'm saying book, out of the books array list, if book.is available, and this is where I'm using my getter, right, that I created. If book is available, then print, and here I'm going to use a tab character. There we go. And then concatenate on with that book.get title and author. So this is where I'm using that custom method that I created to actually concatenate that title and author together. And it'll put it on the next line, and it'll tab it over a little bit so it kind of looks, a little easier to read in the console. Okay, so I'm wanting to see if yeah, that's going to do it. Okay, so let's go over, now that we've kind of gotten all these written, let's go test them all out. I'm going to go over to main. We're going to instantiate a library object called library. And again, we don't need to import the library or book classes. They're part of the same package. So I can just say I want the type to be library. And then I want a new library. Remember, this is just using the default constructor. We didn't define any specific constructor for this. So that's all I have to do. Now we have an object that is of the library class, and it has an empty array list as one of its fields that already exists. So we can, create some books and then actually use the add book method from the library class to add it on, add them in, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So let's create 3 books. I'm going to create a book class book called book 1, and I'll say new book, and let's say it's Contact by Carl Sagan, and it has 430 pages. And you can see those correspond directly with title, author, and num pages. And then I'll do it again. Book 2 is a new book. Oops. Sorry, it's jumping around on me. There we go. And let's say this is Nemesis by Isaac Asimov. And it's 364 pages. Great. And then we'll do a third book. Book 3 is a new book. And this one's going to be 1984, in quotes, of course, because it's a string. And George Orwell, but let's say we don't know the pages, and we're going to, because we have that overloaded constructor. And by the way, if you can read that, it's kind of small, but see how it's offering to me the 2 different signatures. It recognizes, hey, there's 2 different constructors here. You can either use title, author, and num pages, or you can use title, author. So it's okay for me to just finish this, and then it knows, okay, you used the other one. And then we would expect that num pages is going to be 0 for that one, right? So now we have 3 books. So let's add each one to the library. So that means we're going to call library and say add book. This is our custom, instance method that we wrote that will, all we have to do is give it one of the books. So I'm going to give it book 1, and then I'm going to, forget in IntelliJ, it's different. Okay, there we go. And we're going to do book 2 and book 3. And now we should have all of them. So let's use our method to print available books, and let's see what we've got. Library dot print available books. And let's go ahead and run it at this point now that we have something to show for it. Let me do it here first. Okay, list of books available. And then we see all 3 books listed. They're tabbed over, and they're, nicely formatted because we made use of that instance level method from the book class that concatenated together the title and the author. So this is how you kind of can, put the methods where they belong in the right classes, but then make good use of them where you need them. This is a good example of that. All right, let's check out the first book. I'm going to say book 1.checkout. And if you recall, that should automatically change the value of its available field. And we also should see something show up in the console. So let's run this again. Okay, Contact by Carl Sagan has been checked out of the library. So now if we print available books again, we would expect that it's no longer going to be there, right? Let's run that. There we go. So now the list of books available tells us that only Nemesis and 1984 are still available because the other one has been checked out. So let's check out the second book and check in the first book and then print that again, and we should see that those work as well. So book 2.checkout and then book 1.check-in to change that available back to true. And then we'll come down here and say library dot print available books and run it again. Let me pull this up. Okay, so we had all 3 books available. We checked out Contact, and now it shows the other 2. Then we checked out Nemesis and checked Contact back in, and now the list of book availables is just Contact in 1984, as we expected. So, this is, just a little bit of kind of scratching the surface of what you could do, right, with this kind of application, that you could have these objects that represent real life things and manage the data around them by having these classes, having all of the, the getters and setters that you need for protecting your fields, have the specific methods you want to write, the instance methods that allow you to interact with those fields, and then just making sure that you've got the right ones attached to the right class, whatever makes sense for the level at which you're working with the data. So those are the kinds of things you're going to want to think about when it comes to, your studio tonight. Before I get into the studio, who has questions about what I just did? No one? All right. That is all right. Okay, well, I hope that those examples have been helpful for you. I will get these slides to you right after we get done here, if you want to use them for reference. So Thursday, again, you've got a catch-up class with guest speakers. So make sure you come to this Zoom room first all together for the speaker, and then you'll split out after that. No class on Monday. And then we're going to talk about part 2 of classes on the following Thursday, and that's chapter 5. And that's also the day that you want to shoot for to get your graded assignment number 1 turned in. And then we'll talk about unit testing in Java. You did unit testing with JavaScript with Jasmine before. Now we're going to use JUnit with Java. So we'll do that the following Monday after that. Okay, so for tonight's studio, you're going to go to chapter 4. Here's the key. You do not want to start with the code. You want to start just by designing the classes. I did mine in an Excel spreadsheet. You can use a piece of paper, you can use diagrams, you can do whatever you want. But just think about what fields are needed, what fields, what constructors, what getters and setters. Don't worry about methods for tonight. You're going to do that next time. In the org.launchcode package of the restaurant menu project that's in classes part 1 of your repo that has all your stuff for these few classes, you are going to possibly find that there are already some classes there named menu and menu item. If that's the case, delete them and don't look at them, because you don't want them to inform how you design your classes. This can be done multiple ways. And I got to tell you that when I did my solution, which is the one that is recorded, and you guys will have access to that video later tonight, I actually did it kind of different than the way LaunchCode did. LaunchCode accidentally put the starter code for part 2 in the part 1 folder. They fixed it today, but most of you have already cloned down your repos, right? So you're still going to have those there. So seriously, just go over there, select them with the shift key, right click, hit delete, get rid of them. And then when it's time, after you've done your design portion, you could create your own menu and menu item classes and start to put in what you designed. I highly recommend, and the instructions will tell you this as well, highly recommend that you do this with pair programming, at least one other person, maybe 2. Work together on this, because you're going to think this through better if you do it with partners. Okay, so that's pretty much all you have to do. Mal, you have a question?
Oh yeah, this is just a quick question, more so about IntelliJ. I've really been enjoying using it. I think the tooltips are really helpful and the error messages. And I was just wondering if I could also use it to code JavaScript or any of the other things that we've done so far.
You can absolutely. You can use it for pretty much just about anything. Most JavaScript developers still prefer to use something a little lighter like VS Code. But yeah, you can. Okay, so if that is it, then I'm going to send you guys off to work on the studio and have some fun with it. And don't worry about if it doesn't come out quite right, or you end up in the end going, oh man, I wish I'd done that differently. Because guess what? You're going to get to continue working on it in the next studio. In our next class, which is on Thursday the 7th.